Let's go over my thoughts on part 1 very fast. I love the story being built for the most part, but as a theorist, it feels very fanfiction-y. It seems more like MatPat's headcanons within the rules of the FNAF universe, and that's not the worst thing. I don't mind that. That said, what can you do about it? The pre-Fredbear's era literally has one poster to go off of, so I don't think you can do much else. What does bug me is that Chica's party world is only ever mentioned in the context of Afton Robotics, and the entire original Chica IP thing relies on the idea that Chica is the only non-Southern character in the Country Bumpkin Band, because only Rockstar Chica has a Southern accent.
That's right! And don't you come back now, you hear?
All other Chicas in UCN don't have that.
You won't get tired of my voice, will you?
Let's smile together. Today is all about me.
And she doesn't have any other obvious Southern themings in general. It's also hard to say that in Puppet Carver, Chica is in fact the weird bird thing. It could be any generic animatronic, which is just kind of the theme of that. I have other issues with bringing Puppet Carver into the story and trying to use it as evidence, because a lot of stuff like Henry being the Puppet Carver himself, which I know he's not called that, I just forgot his name off the top of my head. But saying he's for a fact the Henry stand-in for the story doesn't really work, because he doesn't get taken in by another company in that story. Nothing like that happens. So saying that's proof that Henry was absorbed by William is very flimsy in my opinion, because it doesn't happen in that story. And there's no other obvious connection to Henry. It's hard to say this is Henry's origin story, the short story. Also, if we are using the encyclopedia, which I don't agree with at all, according to it, Ned Bear is a Freddy ripoff, which could place him literally anywhere in the timeline. That's not evidence for or against this theory. That's not proof for it. You can't say the encyclopedia is proof that they are absorbed knockoffs. It's also worth noting that they're still owned by a company called Stange Budget Tech in Pizzeria Simulator, which implies that they're still owned by someone else until after Pizzeria Simulator. I mean, it's possible they're just a generic, cheap brand license characters that anyone can buy and use to their brand whenever they want. Plus, there is another moment in the series where it does seem like we actually see on screen the mediocre melodies get absorbed into Fazbear's. It's kind of up to interpretation, but I'll just show it to you. We see in Security Breach that Mike has a high quality restaurant, and if he got that far, that means he would have had to have the mediocre melodies, which could mean that's the point in time where they get absorbed into Fazbear's, if that's a plot point that happens at all. If they do get absorbed, this is probably where it would happen. I'm not saying that's like a complete debunk of that entire premise, but I thought I'd bring it up anyway. Alright, now to what I think are going to be the troubled episodes. Let's get into what worries me, which is part 2, specifically Elizabeth being the first victim. MatPat brought this up in his encyclopedia reaction. This is, and I'm not being hyperbolic here, this is pretty much impossible. Firstly, let's go over MatPat's evidence, because I do want to bring up why he came to this conclusion. I don't want to just bash it out of nowhere.
Which is specifically when Elizabeth Afton dies, because very clearly she seems like she should be the first death, based on a lot of clues. And actually, I'd love your thoughts, because it's finalized, but if you have thoughts, I'd love to hear them. Elizabeth dies, she gets scooped by Baby, but, and then that leads to Fredbear's Family Diner in 1983, where you see an empty girl's room in the house, and all the nightmare animatronics have stomach mouths. They have mouths in their stomach, like Baby ripping open and having a stomach mouth. Throughout the entire game, there's this repeated line of, hey, be careful what you saw, be careful what you saw. No, remember what you saw, to the crying child. Remember what you saw, remember what you saw. Which, what did he see? Did he see someone in the back of the pizzeria and he got scared of them? Yeah. Why else would the nightmares have stomach mouths? It seems to indicate that he saw his sister get scooped by this thing, and so the nightmare animatronics are a way of getting him scared of the animatronics, so he doesn't want to get close to them and fall into the same murder trap that Elizabeth went into. I think, and there's other things too, but there are so many pieces in place that say Elizabeth had to have died prior to the crying child's death in 1983. All of these lore bits, I'm like, this feels so right and so correct in so many ways. And then also Elizabeth's death prompts Afton to go a little bit nutty and crazy, and that's when he starts killing people and whatever. Insert motivation here, right?
The evidence goes that he thinks the nightmare stomach mouth are like Baby's claw, like the crying child sees Baby's claw and then starts having nightmares because of that, or that William is making the nightmares off of that image. The issue is only Nightmare Fredbear has the stomach claw, and Nightmare is just a recolor of him, so it's only one unique design that has this trait. Shouldn't they all have the stomach claw thing if that was what we were meant to get out of it? Also, Scott was extremely adamant that the last game would be FNAF 4, and the FNAF world will be kind of like a bonus, like sort of like what UCN ended up being for Pizzeria Simulator. And this like lasted all the way until update 2, which makes picking evidence for later games very difficult for it. That's a struggle to do, is because it's all meant for the specific context, and we don't know what that context was exactly meant to be. Another thing that MatPat brings up is that Elizabeth's room, in quotation marks, who knows who this room was meant to be? It could be the mom's room for all we know. Does a kid not being in that room all the time prove they don't exist? I don't agree with that premise. I mean, Michael doesn't even have a bedroom in FNAF 4's minigames, and neither does William or any parent figure. So does that mean they don't exist? No, that's dumb. I'm basically joking when I say that, but that's the kind of logic this goes on. If we don't see Elizabeth in her room, does that mean she doesn't exist? No. Before I get into my favorite counter-argument for this, let's go into what MatPat said.
The problem, though, and the problem with that is that it goes back to the murder weapon in the first place, right? Which is, why would Afton have created an animatronic with a giant claw in its stomach to capture and preserve kids? Because this is past his murdering days. This is actually him trying to preserve kids. Because it's associated with the Funtime animatronics. They got the stomach capsules and all this stuff. So why would he design an animatronic to capture kids if he hasn't become a murderer? Like, we know that the missing children's incident happens in 1985. We know that the crying child dies in 1983. So for Elizabeth to predate all of that doesn't make sense. Like, so, and more specifically, for a baby to have a giant claw in her stomach doesn't make any sense. So that to me is the trickiest part of the timeline of the stuff that we know, of the main series of games, because all the evidence in FNAF 4 and beyond is kind of like pointing at, like, Elizabeth should have died really early in this process. But then you look at the actual, but she died to Baby, which is a Funtime animatronic built to capture kids. That doesn't seem to, why would that happen prior to 1983? It doesn't make, Afton would not have built that thing that early. That to me is the trickiest part of the timeline.
It doesn't make sense for Baby to have a stomach claw pre-William murder psychopath era. Why would he do that? He's not gone off the deep end yet. Why would he make Funtime murder robots? There is the general argument that the Funtimes are way more advanced than the Fredbear era animatronics, so it would be really weird if they were the same era. I don't necessarily agree with that, because FNAF has always played fast and loose with technology, and it's always way more than it should be. What really sticks this to me, what makes this very hard for me to agree with, is that it's heavily implied the Funtimes didn't exist until 1985. According to Hand Unit, Circus Babies was formed after the closure of Freddy's. Play the clip.
Frightening silence with some light-hearted banter. Due to the massive success, and even more so the unfortunate closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, it was clear that the stage was set, no pun intended, for another contender in children's entertainment.
But that's just the rental service, right? For context, let's dial back a little bit to Baby saying her original pizzeria was only open for one day, and that on that day she met and killed Elizabeth.
Did you know that I was on stage once? It wasn't for very long, only one day. A little girl, standing by herself. I was no longer myself, and I stopped singing. My stomach opened, and there was ice cream. I couldn't move, at least, not until she stepped closer. There was screaming for a moment, but only for a moment. Then other children rushed in again, but they couldn't hear her over the sounds of their own excitement. I still hear her sometimes. Why did that happen?
Why that's important is in the teaser closed due to leaks. There are details about Circus Babies being closed due to gas leaks, which seems to be a cover-up for something, presumably Elizabeth's death. There's more to it than just the brightened up background newspaper article things. There's commentary from local officials and people working on the scene at the time in the source code. One of them reads, "Look for Circus Baby in your local party," which refers to the rental service renting out the characters to local parties. This means the rental service was born shortly after Circus Baby's Pizza World closes, and since that closes on day 1, which is Elizabeth's death day, Pizza World is right before the rental service is right after Freddy's, and the Freddy's is closed because of the MCI. which would mean Elizabeth is not only not the first victim, she has to die as soon as maybe 1985 at the earliest. At latest, it's 1993, considering that Charlie gives gifts to the MCI kids, which means she dies before them, and the bite victim dies in 1983, which is obviously before 1985, which means he has to die before the MCI. But you can't argue that Elizabeth dies first. She's minimum 8th dead kid. I know MatPat's not going to see this, but I thought I'd throw this together anyway. If I'm wrong and he pulls the rug out of us and says, oh, the bite victim dies first, or Charlie dies first, I don't know why he sounds like a 1920s radio man. If he does that, that's a win for me anyway. If someone on the GT team sees this, cool, I love all of your videos and work. I've been a fan forever. And hey, if you are seeing this, check out some of my videos, like Mike not being the person on the couch, in fact being the kid who runs away in Midnight Motorist. I covered it in this video, and then I expand upon it in 2 videos based on criticism by God. It fixes a lot of issues that could potentially be strung up at this point. Anyway, that's just my mad ramblings. Bye.